5. Scott Simmons joins us this morning. He is the Chief Communications Officer with MEMA, the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency. October is Fall Severe Weather Preparedness. Well, not the whole month. We got we got Severe Weather Preparedness Week in this first week of October. Scott, good morning. Thanks so much for your time.
Good morning. Glad to be here. Wait, I thought we were talking about Ole Miss football. I wasn't inspired. No, I'm joking.
Well, if you would like.
No, I would love to, but perhaps another morning.
Perhaps so.
Yes.
Got to be ready for severe weather. We normally think of, I guess tornado season, if you will, as kind of being in the spring into the early part of the summer. That has become a much larger part of our fall weather patterns. We are still in hurricane season. I think technically that lasts through mid-November.
Right.
What do people need to be focused on right now?
Well, we ask people, because this is what we call Fall Severe Preparedness Week, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the secondary severe weather season, if you want to say. The spring, of course, is always active, but we remind people just how many tornadoes do hit our state in the fall season. Just last year, we had 85 tornadoes for the whole year. We had 53 just in November and December, and it's a scary bit of reality when you realize that we just get tattooed all the time with severe weather. You know, we're still working on the recovery from the March 14th, 15th storms, where so many people were impacted by the twisters that hit air. But in the fall season, we get them too, and it really picks up pace. I know as a journalist covering them into Christmas sometimes because they have no schedule. Just that fall weather pattern sets in, and that's when we start to see problems really arise.
This is anecdotal or just an observation. It's not based on science. It's not based on a meteorology degree. But it feels to me like our weather patterns have changed in the sense that it stays warm longer into the fall than it used to. And it stays cold a little longer into the spring maybe than it used to. And I operate, so much of my mind I feel like operates on an athletic calendar.
Yeah.
I feel like it stays warm longer into football and it's cold longer into the start of baseball than maybe it once was. Again, whether that's accurate or not, I don't know. But it feels like with the tornadoes that you're talking about that happened in November and into December, we've got this fight that's going on in the atmosphere between the warm weather and the cold weather, and it leads to atmospheric instability. Is there anything to that?
I don't know it. I'm not a meteorologist, but I'll play one on TV. No,
okay.
And I joke about it, but seriously, you talked about how it works on an athletic schedule. I did this season. You know, two-a-days started for us August 10th. I went back and looked in the 1980s when August 10th, what was the average temperature? It was about mid-90s, which was the norm. We just, I guess, sucked it up back then. We're not perhaps as sensitive to it as we are now. I wish there was some scientific proof. People will argue about global warming. I don't see it. I know that we have short winters, it feels like. I know that we have, one of the highest activity, I think fourth highest in the nation right now, in the number of tornadoes that have hit our area. Why? I don't know. I just know that it does happen. And that's why we ask people to focus during this week. All right, look, nothing's happening weather-wise, right? Knock on wood. Think about what you've got at your house. Are you prepared if, God forbid, a tornado dropped in? Could you stand on your own for 72 hours? Would you manage the water? People don't think about having a gallon of water for each person in your house each day. What if the water shut down like we had in the Jackson water crisis? Something that we learned, you don't miss having water out of the tap until it's not coming out of the tap anymore. Think about those things now, what you need to do to make sure that your family is prepared. We ask people to focus on that. Today, we're asking them to focus on tornado safety. Certainly those who live in mobile homes. Yes, they're convenient. Yes, they're affordable. But they're also at the highest risk of damage during straight-line winds and tornado. We ask people today, think about what you would do if a tornado warning comes to your area. Do you know where the safe room is in your county? Is there a resident, a neighbor, a friend, or family who has a fixed foundation home that you could go to and ride out those hours of the tornado warning threat being at its highest? We ask people to think about that now.
In the event of severe weather, thankfully, I hesitate to say this out loud, and you probably will slap me for saying it, but it has been a quiet hurricane season, at least so far. We know that we are not out of hurricane season yet. In the event of a major storm or a major disaster that strikes in Mississippi what does it look like? What does it feel like at MEMA during the couple of days lead up, the immediacy during the storm, and then the immediate aftermath?
I wonder what that's going to be like, too. I have been with MEMA now 6 months.
Okay.
Until now, people have always asked me leading into the season, Scott, are you worried about hurricane season? I'm like, I'm the guy who used to go stand in the hurricane. Now I'm working out of the headquarters in Pearl, so I'm not sure what it will be like to be on this side of the fence. I know talking to my colleagues, though, how they really ramp up because there's so many factors. Prepositioning supplies. You can't just go put your tarps and your water bottles and stuff in a warehouse in Biloxi. We know from Katrina, those got whacked out from the beach all the way to 90. So we think about things about prepositioning. What areas are going to be impacted in the event of a hurricane? Look at Hattiesburg and what will happen to that community because it's the hub city. All the interstates lead into it, right?
Right.
People will go there. That city will be overwhelmed. We'll think about and plan as we move forward in that event of how we get people from harm's way further inland and how Hattiesburg becomes a location where we can move materials and response crews in fast. One of the great aspects of in the wake of Katrina, if you can, says the establishment of the Wind Radio Network, it allows the state now to have radio communications even in the event, hopefully, of a Katrina. Because when Katrina hit, remember the first communications that came in from that area came from a ham radio operator who was working out of the EOC there on the coast, crawled up on the radio tower, put his ham radio antenna on it, and was able to get the first ham communications back to MEMA to let them know we're okay, but there's problems. We're looking at all aspects. We look at preparedness for a storm, any storm, but a hurricane you can see coming, and that's when you really start ramping things up. And we ask people to think about leaving, getting out of the way. One of the problems we ran into during Katrina is that so many people thought that, well, this previous storms didn't happen. So there was a little bit of anxiety in that I'm not going to leave again. The last two storms didn't really happen. We had a lot of people on the coast who did not bug out, and they suffered as a result of it. We lost 238 Mississippians in that storm. Looking at hurricanes, we ask people, start thinking about who's on the coast. You got any family in Pascagoula? Make sure they know they can come up to Brandon and stay at your house. Start those planning for your family and friends so that you can alleviate the impacts of a disaster like that.
Scott Simmons, Chief Communications Officer with MEMA. You talk about the amount of time that you've been there. What's it been like, kind of learning the language? Mm-hmm. Obviously, as a news reporter, you had your own language. What about internally and just kind of the way things operate?
It's impressive, to put it honestly. You never thought about the inner workings of the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency until you get on the ground and you see these professionals who really care and work with FEMA to get funding, to fight and scratch for every nickel and dime to help residents recover from disasters. How do you deal with grants and funding that help put boots on the ground, that train emergency management agency employees in other counties to make sure they're ready to respond? We talk about federally funded, state managed, locally implemented. And you realize, being on the ground at MEMA, how much training takes place from MEMA for those frontline people in each county, helping them be prepared for what they do. I didn't know much about that, but I do now. And there's just a lot of that happens that really lays a foundation for preparedness in our state and gave me a new advantage to how things are done that I didn't have before.
Scott Simmons is my guest, Chief Communications Officer at MEMA. We're going to talk with him a little bit more on the other side of this break. I'm going to get him to describe to you the MEMA headquarters and what that looks like. I've had people say it's like you're trying to launch a spaceship, or you feel like you could launch a spaceship from that technologically advanced center. We'll get into that and a little bit more with Scott Simmons on the other side of this timeout. You can be part of the conversation on the C Spire text line. 601-879-4395 is the number. The website, cspire.com. C Spire, inspired by you. We've got more coming up on the other side of this short timeout. Mornings with Richard Cross, SuperTalk Mississippi, presented by Community Bank. Good to be with you this morning. It is Mornings with Richard Cross, middle of the week, which means we're on the downhill slide of the weekend, and that's good for most people. I mean, unless you have to work on the weekends, then it's just another set of days. Scott Simmons is my guest, Chief Communications Officer with MEMA. Mm-hmm. So you worked in television news for a long time. You make the transition to communications officer, and for a lot of people, they would look at that and go, okay, that makes sense, but it doesn't always work that way. Is this position for you, are you especially suited for this because of your understanding of what journalists need in times of disaster?
I hope so. That depends on who you talk to, right? What they may say.
Yeah.
But, I spent so much of my career, you're talking about 3 decades and chasing storms. People had asked me, Scott, how do you feel about hurricane season coming up? And I'm like, I'm usually the guy standing in the storm.
Yeah.
Now I'll be working out of the bunker in Pearl. Working with journalists, the easy part for me is knowing what reporters need and what news people need. That's the easy part. The eye-opening experiences of me have been the administrative stuff, EMPG grants, filling out FEMA paperwork and things like that I didn't see coming, managing the emergency alert system network through MEMA, those things that you didn't think about. Those were the adjustments. But as a journalist, answering reporter questions has been the easy part because you know what they want. You know why they need what they need. Sometimes you know what they don't really need, but they ask for it anyway, and you give it to them, and you're like, yeah, you don't really need that, but I'll give it to you because you're not going to wade through that mess. You do that, and you work with media because that's the voice to people, to our viewers, the people that we serve at MEMA is that, we reach out to our partners in the media because they're our direct conduit to get to that message to the people, like Fall Severe Preparedness Week going on. This is how we communicate with them so that they'll be better prepared.
Yeah. I don't know if you had this growing up or even in your adult life. I'm that weird person, but there are a lot that are like me that, you and all of the good people at MEMA advise people on how to stay away from storms. And when I see a storm coming in, I want to go stand on the front porch and watch it and figure out how hard the wind's blowing and all those things. You had that responsibility when you were covering these storms, as you were saying just a second ago, standing out in them. Whether you're talking about Jim Cantori or Mike Seidel or some of the other Weather Channel people that you've seen do that through the years. How do you get to that point? Is there this curious fascination? Was there a thrill, an exhilaration, an adrenaline rush that went along for you with covering these storms?
Yeah, there was I won't lie, there's an adrenaline rush because you're on the front lines of a major event. And when I was working on the NBC in New Orleans, and going into these storms in Florida, I would do a live shot for the 10 o'clock, and then they would flip me over to CNN, and then they would flip me over to MSNBC, and then I would flip over to Weather Channel, and I'd call my mom, at like 11 o'clock at night, Mom, I'm about to be on Weather Channel in 5 minutes, and have to hang up. And
yeah.
So you were doing a lot of that, and I tell the stories about, how I approach storm coverage. Most importantly, I want to make sure I protected the photographer and the equipment so we can continue to do our job. One time doing a hurricane down in Florida, and I'm standing on the beach, and I get a call from the studios in New Orleans, and like, Scott, are you standing in front of a building? I'm like, no, why? Well, you're standing on the beach, and you're standing up with the guy from the CBS that says he's in the same area, and he can barely stand up. And I look down the beach about 100 yards, and that guy's doing the Cantori, oh, my God, I can barely stand up. And I'm like, I am not going to do that. And I didn't. I really didn't. I did not try to add to it when I covered this storm because that was there already. And they didn't need the theatrics; they needed the facts. And one of the things I always try to approach in my career is, keep it simple, stupid. Basic facts that people need. So in covering hurricanes, the basic ingredients were there: bad wind, bad water, a lot of potential damage. The people stories within those really gave the story context. T-Boy, who lives in New Orleans but has a condo in Destin and is trying to hold on to that. Put up, the storm shields outside the windows of his home, vacation home, or the fisherman who's trying to hold on to his boat because if that boat goes, then his business goes.
Yeah. Those
are the stories that gave context in explaining the impacts of hurricanes and storms like that.
I'm glad you went down that road before I asked it. I've seen those. We've all seen those where you've got the off-camera shoot. We're like, hold on, the weather's not doing this to him. This is exaggerated. I think about the the scene from the original Twister, not the remake, where the person had to like use the belt or the rope to tie themselves to a pole to stay in place. Did you ever have anything quite that severe?
No, I never tied myself to a pole. No, I had stuff that pushed me around. The truth is, of all the hurricanes I covered, and I really date myself when I say I covered Hurricane Andrew, but one of the scariest hurricanes I covered was a Cat 1, I think it was called Danny, that came across Grand Isle, Louisiana. And that's a barrier island, if you know South Louisiana. Yeah. And so there's water in front of you and there's water behind you. And it was the only time that we had to evacuate our location because we were about to get washed over. And Highway 1, which leads to Grand Isle, was literally about to be overcome by storm surge. So we pushed into Port Fourchon to start going live from there, almost disappointed that I had to back off the beach line, but that was because it was about to get hairy. And again, if the equipment got taken over and knocked out, then you were out of business. So we always had to make sure that we protected staff and gear.
Scott Simmons, Chief Communications Officer with MEMA. We'll let you go here in just a couple of minutes. As we kind of go back to Preparedness Week for fall severe weather, what's kind of the lasting message that you pass along to people?
Think about what you need to do if it does happen. People say, we'll be fine, whatever, until it hits you. And then you realize that you got caught flat-footed. Just think about it right now. Nothing's going on, right? Do you have a case of water in the garage? Do you have enough canned goods that could push you through 3 days? In your freezer, do you have enough food that you could, even if you lost power, you could handle 3 days on your own? Think about those things. Think about evacuation plans. Think about your pets. If you had to bug out, could you bring your pets with you? What if you had to go to a shelter? Can't get the pets in? Most of the pets do. The shelters do take pets. I know
Sure.
Rankin County certainly does. We ask people to think about their preparedness and their loved ones. You may think about yourself, but did you think about your mom who's 88 years old? I know I do. And you think about those things that what would you need to do in the event? Hurricane Katrina is a reminder. We just had our big anniversary, right? Remember, Katrina splintered the state. Here in where I lived in Brandon, I was in the dark for 6 days. I was sleeping on my screened-in patio and going to work at 10 and getting off at midnight, anchoring the news. We think about that when it matters, when it happens to you. Start thinking about it now before it happens to you so that you and your loved ones are prepared.
Well, and you point out where Brandon was in the aftermath of Katrina. You go 70, 100 miles south to Hattiesburg, and it was worse there, and then it gets progressively worse as you go to the coast. And I think that's, with the big storms, one of the things that we forget, just how far north the impact can exist.
For me, 20 years later, I had left New Orleans. I had sold my house a year and 3 months before Katrina. I was living in New Orleans in Lakeview, took the opportunity to move back to my hometown and be an anchor. And all of my friends evacuated to our studios from WDSU in New Orleans, and they were looking at me because no one had expected that the storm A would have done that, but B, that it would have pushed that far in.
Yeah.
And we were doing wall-to-wall coverage because, again, the storm splintered the state, knocked out power lines, gas shortages were all over the place, long lines of people trying to get just gas for their vehicle. You don't think about that until you don't have it. Do you have a 5-gallon gas tank with gasoline in your garage just in case? Some people do that for their lawnmowers. You need to think about that in a storm event, certainly if one's coming your way, because you never know you'll need those things until you realize you don't.
Scott, last thing for you. I mentioned this or teased it before the break. The operations center for MEMA, the headquarters there, what is that? You described it as the bunker earlier.
The bunker, a big bunker.
Try to put into words visually what that looks like.
Well, to the state's credit, the work on this started before Katrina. Before that, MEMA was in a little room place. I mean, a small operations center. But they had started the blueprints realizing the need for an operations center that could handle the worst-case scenario. MEMA is a huge bunker facility capable of withstanding arguably a Cat 5, Cat 4, EF4 tornado, EF5 even possible. 2 floors, that goes underground. And we have multiple operations in there, and it's a hub that enables us to have eyes on everything. We are plugged into all the MDOT cameras and the systems that we have from one end of the state to the other, and it provides a magnificent opportunity to try and monitor and respond to what the state needs. And by the way, if you have any groups that would like to come see, we do give tours and show people what that's like. We like to educate people about what their tax dollars are doing to prepare Mississippians.
Scott Simmons, Chief Communications Officer with the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency. I hope all of our conversations can be this calm and laid back.
I agree.
We certainly will be in touch if disaster strikes.
We're here. We got you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Mornings with Richard Cross, SuperTalk, Mississippi. We've got about half an hour left with you on this Wednesday morning. Plenty still to get to. If you want to join the conversation, you can do so on the C Spire text line at 601-879-4395. Have you heard about the push for voter ID in California? It's the newest and biggest project on the docket for TPUSA. We're back with you right after this.